¿A los cuántos años empezaste a ejecutar?
Los 11.
¿Tú eres el que sales en el video golpeando a un sujeto que está colgado en una casa?
Sí,
¿Quién te daba órdenes de golpearlos, de ejecutar?
el negro.
¿Dónde aprendiste a ejecutar, a golpear?
En la ropa.
Believe it or not, this innocent-looking boy is actually a cold-blooded assassin who was hired by the cartel to kill and mutilate their enemies. He shocked the entire nation of Mexico when he admitted to killing 4 men by slitting their throats. But what was even more scary was that he never showed any remorse for his actions. But how did such a young boy get involved in such a heinous crime? And today, we'll look at the case of Edgar Jiménez, the 11-year-old Sicario that decapitated cartel members. Edgar Jiménez Lugo, or El Ponchis, was born in 1996 in San Diego, California. He was the youngest of 5 siblings and grew up in a dysfunctional family where both of his parents were addicts and often got in trouble with the law. Shortly after his birth, Edgar reportedly tested positive for coke in his system. His parents were soon arrested and charged, and Edgar and his siblings were taken by Child Protective Services. When Edgar was around 5 years old, his paternal grandmother was awarded custody of Edgar and his siblings, and they went to live with her in the state of Morelos, Mexico. There, Edgar was enrolled in a local school, and for the first time in his life, he was actually happy and doing very well. He really loved his grandmother, who at least gave him and his siblings some stability in their life. But unfortunately, this would not last long. When Edgar was only 11 years old, tragedy hit his young life when his grandmother died of cancer. With no one else to look after him, Edgar found himself in the streets trying to fend for himself. He was soon arrested for assault and theft, but shortly released because of his young age. Around this same time, one of Edgar's older sisters had started dating a guy by the name of Julio Radilla Hernandez. On the surface, Julio seemed to be a nice guy, and everyone in the family liked him. He was successful and generous, and treated Edgar as a small brother, buying him expensive gifts. Edgar started seeing Julio as a role model, thinking that he was doing all those nice things for him out of the goodness of his heart. But nothing could have been further from the truth. Julio, also known in the streets as El Negro, who was a high-ranking leader in the South Pacific Cartel, which operates in Morelos, Mexico. The cartel was formed in April 2010 by Hector Beltran Leyva after the collapse of the Beltran Leyva cartel, which he had headed alongside his 3 brothers, Alfredo, Arturo, and Carlos. Originally, the Beltran Leyva brothers were part of the infamous Sinaloa cartel, but when Alfredo was arrested by Mexican special forces, the remaining brothers turned on their then-boss, El Chapo, who they believed had set up Alfredo. In response to the supposed betrayal, the brothers split out of the Sinaloa cartel to form their own Beltran Leyva organization, BLO, and then waged a bloody war on El Chapo. The war between BLO and Sinaloa cartel was violent and brutal, with a lot of kidnappings, and wild public shootouts. El Chapo's own son, Edgar, would become one of the many casualties of the senseless war after he was gunned down at a shopping center parking lot by 15 gunmen. This led to special law enforcement agencies getting involved, and in December 2009, one of the Beltran Leyva brothers, Arturo, was gunned down at his home by the Mexican Navy Elite Special Forces Unit, while another brother, Carlos, and several of BLO high-ranking members were arrested. Hector was the only brother left standing after the war, and he went on to form the South Pacific Cartel. However, he would be arrested in 2014 and eventually die of a heart attack while in prison. Now, the recruitment of children by organized crime groups has been an ongoing crisis in Mexico. In fact, the Network for Children's Rights in the country estimates that there are over 35,000 youths aged between 12 to 16 being used by cartels as decoys for their heinous criminal activities. The groups even have training camps dedicated to teach the innocent kids on how to sell and distribute narcotics, as well as training them to become a sicario, which is a Spanish word for hitman. One sicario who went through the horrifying training shared his experience at the training camp in this chilling interview.
Y ya estando ahí, llegó una persona que estábamos por primera vez y nos dijo, bueno, ya están aquí, el que se quiere ir que se vaya ahorita. Y cortó cartucho con la pistola. Aquí la única forma que te vayas es por las patas por delante.
Unfortunately for Edgar, that's exactly what happened to him. After meeting Julio, Edgar was integrated into the South Pacific Cartel alongside several other children and was assigned the duty of distributing coke to dealers around the state of Morelos. However, as it would later be discovered, that was the least terrifying thing that he did for the cartel. In December 2010, Edgar, who was by now 14 years old and going by his nickname El Ponchis, was arrested by the Mexican army as he and one of his sisters, who was 16 years old, tried to flee the country.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Edgar Jiménez Lugo.
¿Cuántos años tienes?
¿Cómo que hacer?
14. ¿Dónde te detuvieron? ¿Dónde te agarraron?
En
Al aeropuerto.
el aeropuerto,
¿A dónde ibas?
¿A dónde ibas?
a San Diego,
¿Con quién ibas?
con mi hermana,
¿A los cuántos años empezaste a ejecutar?
a los 11.
¿Tú eres el que sales en el video golpeando a un sujeto que está colgado en una casa?
Sí, es
¿Quién te daba órdenes de golpearlos, de ejecutar?
el negro,
¿Dónde aprendiste a ejecutar, a golpear?
en el lago.
Apparently, a few weeks before his arrest, two graphic videos started circulating online showing two men being executed by members of the South Pacific Cartel. In one of the videos, which has apparently gotten the name The Human Piñata, a man can be seen hanging from the ceiling by his arms as a group of sadistic cartel members whip him with what looks like a belt before later beating him to death. Edgar admitted to being one of the Sicarios in the video. In the second video, Sicarios stand around him and can be heard mocking and insulting him before one of them kicks the bucket from under the victim's feet. On top of being in these disturbing videos, Edgar was also photographed wielding a rifle and posing with a dead body, which is how he ended up capturing the attention of the authorities. Now, as the reporters questioned him about his 3-year stint with the cartel, Edgar appeared calm and unremorseful as he answered every question. He told them that he had been executing for the cartel since he was 12 years old, and that the cartel would pay him $2,500 per week to behead their enemies. His victims' headless bodies were found hanging from a bridge.
¿Te drogaba
Me drogaba
el negro? ¿Desde cuándo te drogaba el negro?
desde los 12.
¿Desde los 12 perteneces a la banda?
Sí,
¿Y si son del CPS?
sí es.
¿Qué tipo de arma tenían? ¿Qué tipo de armas tenían?
Cuerno de chivo, 45,
Ujú.
¿Cuánto te pagaban?
2.500.
¿Semanales?
Sí,
¿Dólares o pesos?
dólares y pesos.
¿Quién te los pagaba?
Radilla.
¿Y el radilla qué es lo que te decía para convencerte de que mataras?
Más me drogaba. No sabía lo que hacía.
¿Te drogaba con qué? ¿Con marihuana o cocaína?
Con moto.
¿Quién te enseñó a meterte?
Él.
When asked if he was scared about what was going to happen to him now that he had been captured, Edgar said that he wasn't.
¿Tienes miedo?
Sí.
¿Tú tienes miedo?
No.
¿No tienes miedo? ¿Sabes lo que va a pasar?
Sí.
¿Sabes que te van a llevar y te van a juzgar por delitos federales?
Ujú.
¿Estás consciente de eso? ¿Cuántos ejecutaste, dices?
4.
¿Cómo los ejecutaste?
¿Eh?
¿Cómo los ejecutaste?
Los degollé.
Following his confession and the evidence against him, Edgar was charged with homicide, kidnapping, and possession of narcotics and military weapons, charges that would have gotten him several decades in jail. But to everyone's shock, that didn't happen. Apparently, in Mexico, a judge cannot impose a prison sentence for minors below 14 years. For those between 14 and 17, the maximum sentence is 5 years, regardless of what they had done. For Edgar, the Mexican government saw him to be as much a victim as a victimizer, and so he was only given 3 years in juvenile prison. Edgar was released in 2013, and since he was a U.S. citizen and was not facing any charges in the country, he was sent to live with relatives either in San Antonio or San Diego, where his privacy has been protected to this day. Before his release, Edgar had reportedly given an interview to a reporter of the Mexican news magazine Proceso, where he said that he hoped to reunite with his mom and make a better future for himself as a good member of society. And as of January 2023, it seems like he has been keeping up his end of the bargain, as I couldn't find any reports of him reoffending. Meanwhile, Julio, who had groomed him into the life of crime, was arrested in 2011 for killing the son of Mexican poet and activist Javier Cecilia. The son was reportedly found crammed into a car with 6 other bodies, with their wrists and ankles tied up and their heads covered with masking tape. Authorities believe that all 7 victims had suffocated and that the South Pacific Cartel was responsible. As absurd as this case might sound, it's a pretty frightening reality for thousands of kids in Mexico who feel like they have no other options than to join criminal groups. Edgar was actually one of the lucky ones, able to get out in one piece, because many don't.